across America. Live, this is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Thank you very much for joining us for Point of View. I'm having to adjust my microphone because Kirby's so tall, and I'm sitting in his seat today. You will miss him, but I'm very delighted to be able to be here today. There's so much to talk about, and here's something that just came up today. The Little Sisters of the Poor, we've talked about them before. They went to the Supreme Court a couple of times, and today the Supreme Court ruled that they are allowed to opt out of providing contraception to their employees that involves some of them are abortifacient contraceptions, and this is why the Little Sisters of the Poor and many other Protestant groups were reticent to do so under Obamacare. Obamacare, as you know, forced organizations to provide contraception free of charge. The Hobby Lobby case won the right for Christian businesses to opt out of that, but there was still a mandate for nonprofit organizations to offer this. The Little Sisters of the Poor have been to the Supreme Court before. They were sent back down. They went back up. And, of course, here's how the Washington Post announces this court decision that was announced by the court today. The headline is Supreme Court says employers may opt out of Affordable Care Act's birth control mandate over religious and moral objections. The court ruled today, Wednesday, that the Trump administration may allow employers and universities to opt out of the Affordable Care Act requirement to provide contraceptive care because of religious or moral objections. It's been an intense legal battle, says the Post, for 9 years. And we've heard about the Little Sisters of the Poor, and it was just such a contradiction that nuns were being forced to provide birth control to their employees. But it took 9 years for them to finally win the right to really follow their conscience, follow the dictates and mandates and tenets of their faith in their employment practices. So this is a great victory. It expands the ability of employers to claim this exemption, and the government estimates that it could mean 70,000 to 126,000 could lose access to cost-free birth control. A lot of people crying about that, but there's nothing that really says, except for Obamacare, that birth control has to be free, and that all kinds of contraceptives have to be provided through your employment. You can do it the old-fashioned way if you really want it and you work for one of those groups, then go out and get it yourself. So that is a good case. And, it's interesting because I've been complaining about the U.S. Supreme Court and some of its decisions, and a lot of us have, this term. And yet this week it's been a little bit better. There have been, for instance, the faithless elector case came out, I think, in a good way because electors, the people that actually provide the electoral votes in an election, normally they vote the way the state voted, but sometimes just a few faithless electors will vote their own way. And we had like 7 of them in the last presidential election. And so the court said, and some states try to punish those electors with fines or just getting rid of them. And the Supreme Court said, yes, you can punish those electors. The electors need to hold faith with the people and how they voted in an election. So that was a good ruling. And this one is wonderful for religious liberty. And I think there's another one that I may explain later, or the guys may talk about it on Friday here on Point of View. I'm so glad you're with us. I do want to give sort of an update on COVID-19 because, I read one piece about Lockdown Lunacy 2.0 from J.B. Handley. I didn't post this one because I think there's a lot I need to look into before posting it, and maybe it would be better for all of us to discuss it. But, one of the points it made that's very true, we were locked down. Back in March, the lockdowns began, and all the quarantining and the social distancing measures that were brought about, really mandated by governments, they were brought down to flatten the curve. They were implemented so that we would not overwhelm our hospital systems with COVID-19 cases, and so that people would be able to get the health care they needed if they caught it. And so we did that, and it worked. We've done that, and we've done much, much more. There actually hasn't been a hospital system that's been overwhelmed. And even though Texas famously and basically reported ad infinitum by the media is the cases are growing. And, people are scared again, and there's some measures that are kind of being reversed and brought back, including mask wearing in public. So that's happening in the state of Texas. And yet the death rate is extremely low. So we've opened up a little. We've tested more and more. We have lots of new cases. There may be some other good reasons. I think Kirby discussed some yesterday that we have more new cases. It's really not a big surprise. All the second wave states that are getting this quote unquote second wave, which really isn't a second wave, have dramatically increased their testing. And if you're opening up businesses, you are going to get more of the virus. We always expected that. But the death rates, the hospitalization rates are not disturbing, and the death rates are very low. So it has changed. And in my mind, I think we need to concentrate on opening the economy back up. I think the damage done from keeping things closed, from joblessness, from the despair, from the economic damages, outweighs now the idea that we do have a virus that we're dealing with. And we've also all learned how to be much more careful. And I can talk about some of that later. But I do want to share with you this snapshot from the Texas Public Policy Foundation. It was from yesterday. And it kind of helps us understand, since we're speaking to mostly people in Texas right now. And if you're not, you can still learn from this. But Texas Texas has the most COVID recoveries in the United States. We're a big state, so we've had a lot of cases. We've had the most recoveries. We have the lowest fatality rate in the United States. We have a lot of cases, but we have the lowest fatality rate. We have the lowest COVID. This kind of repeats that, but Texas has the lowest COVID fatality rate of the most affected states. And the 24th lowest COVID case rate in the U.S. So even though our cases are going up right now and have been going up, although they may be plateauing, the case rate it's not one of the top case rates for our population. 21% of Texas hospital beds are available, and that goes to what I mentioned earlier, that the idea was to flatten the curve so the hospital systems could handle people. One thing that's happening in the hospitals is people are going back now to get their other procedures that they put off. So the hospitals are filling up partly because of that, and they can always, if it was necessary again, that could be stopped, and you could do what was done back in March and stop all the other procedures, or at least the electives. But that can be dangerous too. There's a trade-off. The Texas COVID positivity rate has been flat for 10 days. And then this report from Texas Public Policy goes to the various counties, talking about each county, large county, and how many people of what percent of the population doesn't have the virus. Well, in Travis County, it's 99.1% of Travis County residents don't have it. In Harris County, it's 99.2%. In Behar County, it's 99.2%. In Dallas County, it's 99%. So those are the stats about COVID-19. We can continue that conversation and more right after this. Stay with us for more of Point of View.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Stephen Moore is an economics columnist who has written for the Wall Street Journal and National Review. His recent Washington Examiner column talked about how the pandemic and the lockdown highlighted the differences between the right and the left. He discussed 11 differences. Let's just look at 3. He says the right believes that stay-at-home orders and social distancing requirements are counterproductive and should be repealed safely and immediately. The left believes that those orders must stay in place but should only apply to those on the right, not to liberal protesters. And over the last few months, we've seen how inconsistently some governors and other political leaders have applied shelter-in-place and stay-at-home orders. He says the right believes the best way to revive the economy is to incentivize a dormant workforce to get back on the job. The left believes that the best way to revive the economy is to pay people more money not to work than to work. And in previous commentaries, I've discussed how providing generous benefits to unemployed people has become a disincentive for them to return to work. He also says the right believes that there are limits to how much government can spend and even borrow to avoid national bankruptcy and financial ruin. The left believes that trillions of dollars of added spending and debt are advisable and benign. Frankly, this is one place where I disagree with Stephen Moore. I wish there were more people on either the right or the left who express much concern about government spending. Yes, we need to help people and businesses that are hurting, but there will be a financial price to pay for all this spending. What we have been through these many months is unprecedented, and the pandemic and the lockdown have also exposed the clear differences between the right and the left. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
A little bit later in this hour, we will be joined by Amy Ford, and she's a young woman. She's actually a young woman, but she's also the president and co-founder of Embrace Grace Incorporated, and they exist for the purpose of helping young women with unplanned pregnancies, and even more than that, helping churches help women with unplanned pregnancies. It's a great organization, local. And so I think they're growing, though. They have quite a reach, and it will be fun to talk with her. And then later in the program, in the next hour, I will be joined by a mother-daughter writing team who wrote a book called Mended. Blythe Daniel and Helen McIntosh. It's a book about mother-daughter relationships, which, as you know, can be wonderful, and they can also be challenging at times. And so they have written about this with a lot of good sort of things that I never even thought of to make the mother-daughter relationship better. My mom's gone to heaven, but my daughter is very much with me, and I have daughters-in-law. And so a lot of this information, it seems to me to be very wise and helpful. You won't want to miss that, especially if you're a mother or a daughter. And I think the guys would like it too, though. So stay with us for that. And then we will also discuss getting back to school. The idea that the president had a meeting yesterday at the White House about how he really wants the schools to open. And, you know, why should we? Why shouldn't we? We'll talk about that a little bit later in the program. But I do want to kind of talk about COVID a little bit more. You know, I've been a very careful citizen when it comes to this. I'm a little bit of a germaphobe, and I think I've discussed this. Anybody who listens on Fridays when we have our roundtable here on Point of View, I have been careful. I never went to the grocery store for like 3.5 months. I ordered everything. And we did it without things that I couldn't get online. And, you know, I've just been very careful, and I am sick of it. I think that, but I really totally agree that the reason for the lockdowns, it succeeded. And so I agree with opening up, and I myself am taking steps to participate in that opening up. For instance, you'd be proud of me. Yesterday, I went to the eye doctor. The week before, I went back and went to a dermatologist appointment I've been putting off. I'm going to the dentist tomorrow, and next week I'm going to my GP doctor for a checkup. So these things that, and I think this is the case in a lot of your lives. You've probably put some things off. I'm getting back to those. I'm going to the grocery store. I try to pick my stores by what stores seem to be doing a good job of keeping, everyone distant and keeping it very clean and quick. So as much as I can, it's Trader Joe's for me. But and the biggest thing is we really needed a vacation, so my husband and I rented an RV and went away for a week, and which meant that we were totally in control of our environment. It was a great vacation. So those are the things that I did. It's sort of a balance of remaining careful and cautious about COVID-19, knowing that we've still got it out there and it's very contagious. But seeing, of course, now the cases are, it's skewing younger and younger, and so not as serious for people. But, I'm not in that real young category. I'm a grandmother. And so it's good to be careful. But I think it's time to start living our lives, and I think it's time to start getting our economy back. And if you are listening and would like to make a call, 800-351-1212 to give your story about what you're doing, I would love to hear about it. I think it's a great topic of conversation, and we should be talking about it. Well, here's another story having to do with COVID. And, as we know, the schools were closed back in the spring. Kids were doing online school. And from what I'm hearing I don't have any kids in school, and really the grandkids, some of them are in little Mother's Day out schools, but that was not as important as it is for the kids who had to miss months of education and now are looking at what's going to happen in the fall. Well, the president said he thinks, and he said he's going to pressure the governors, and he will. He doesn't have any say in it, really much say in what they do. They have to decide. State and local schools and education is more a state and local issue. But he did have this sort of meeting at the White House. It was an event yesterday. And he said it's very important for the well-being of students and parents to get back to school. And we can talk about that because I think schools and our education system are behind the attitudes that are causing some of the violence and protest and just the leftist push that's going on out there across the country. So, in some sense, it's good that parents have had to have their kids home and kind of seeing what they're learning in school and whether it's contributing to that. But a lot of parents are making the decision to continue homeschooling since they had a good experience with it. They saw that their children benefited from it. They don't know what's going to happen in their public school yet, so they're trying to make plans. So this piece comes out of, let's see, I can't really figure out what paper it is, but North Carolina, the title is, the headline, North Carolina government website crashes due to influx of parents filing to homeschool. And it talks about the increasing willingness of parents in North Carolina, and I'm sure this is true in many states, to homeschool their children, has led to the online system for filing a notice of intent to establish a homeschool being temporarily overwhelmed. Now, states to varying degrees control homeschooling. North Carolina is kind of in the middle of what they require. For instance, they do require a national test to be given to all students every year. Some states don't even require that. But the state of North Carolina is saying that they're going to be back online as soon as possible. We apologize for any inconvenience as we work to process these requests. And then there's a statement from the CEO of an organization that's very active in homeschooling, which is Classical Conversations. Many of you may know that group. And Robert Bortons, who's CEO of that, said families are uncertain if the public schools will be able to serve their family needs for school this fall. The pandemic schooling at home gave them opportunity to see that they could homeschool, and now they are choosing to do it intentionally. And that's happened to people I know who were a little bit nervous about homeschooling and haven't chosen to do it because they just don't think they can do it. And they found out they can do it. And there are great curricula out there, and it's a very efficient way to teach little kids to read, for instance, or do math, because you don't need that much time during the day, and then they have the rest of the day to do other things that they're interested in or go on a field trip. As you get older, it's a little different. You have to spend the day, and the kids have to be encouraged to do independent learning. But learning online all the time has been very challenging for many students. And I noticed just reading about different states across the country, some of them had a really rough time getting students to even log in. In California, it was like a huge percent of the population of high school kids didn't even log in to their online distance learning. So basically, from March through May, they had a vacation or they were doing no school. And so, how do you gain control of that? And what damage is that doing to our kids? So the Homeschool Legal Defense Association said public schools across the country are a little nervous about this whole trend for homeschooling. They're actually making it harder for parents to withdraw their children from their schools because, they get money for every student, and it's a lot of paperwork, a lot of employee work to release every student. So it's making some of them panic. Perhaps it will cause the schools to rethink some of the things they're doing that are causing parents to be nervous about it anyway. And I do think it'd be important for students to start making their announcements, whether they're going to open or not. I mean, I'd withdraw my kid too if I didn't know the school was going to be open. You start in July wanting to make some plans because school actually starts in August in most places. So the HSLDA, for instance, as I mentioned, said that North Carolina is a state with moderate regulation in terms of homeschooling. They have to take this standardized test. They have to have immunization records for each student, and they're required to have a regular schedule, excluding reasonable holidays. In other words, you can't just play hooky every day with your kid, which parents who are choosing to homeschool now probably would not do that. I think during COVID, when it was just so crazy, there was probably a lot of time off from school, but people want to get serious about it. So, it's time to start thinking about it and get our act together about schooling. Our president says the schools should open, and really a lot of parents can't even go back to work unless their kids are in school. So it's important for that to happen, and that's just one way in which the economy needs to begin opening up. Our culture needs to begin opening up and getting back to the business of living, of working, and of educating our children. Well, ladies and gentlemen, next up, we are going to talk with Amy Ford. Very often we can be part of the solution when there's an unplanned pregnancy, and she's going to talk about her organization, which does just that. Stay with us for more Point of View.
The year 2020 has been filled with problems, or let's just call them challenges. Before I get into that, we want to thank you. We just passed the end of our fiscal year, and many stepped up in a very big and sacrificial way, showing just how much they believe that Point of View is needed as we head into the last half of this year. And that's where our new challenge comes in. At the last minute, a friend stepped up with a surprising $50,000 matching challenge, and listeners matched it. But after that, yet another friend, knowing how important this year is, put down another $50,000 challenge, and because we were so close to deadline, said we could extend it just a bit to July 15th. As our nation deals with so many issues, make sure that Point of View can be a strong voice for truth by helping us complete that second match. Double your investment by giving at pointofview.net/time or call 1-800-347-5151. The clock is ticking. Pointofview.net/time. That's TIME. Pointofview.net/time or 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You're listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Penna Dexter.
Welcome back to Point of View. You know, those of us who are pro-life, as part of our mission in life and in the movement, a big part of that is to help those who make the decision for life to carry their pregnancy to term. And then, of course, it's often very difficult then to go on and raise that child. And if you're doing that, you need help. Or if you make the choice of adoption, you need help. You need a lot of help and support during that time in your life. And my next guest has seen that need, and she's founded an organization that meets that need and is growing. Her name is Amy Ford. She's president of Embrace Grace Incorporated, which is a nonprofit, and it was formed for the purpose of providing curriculum and leadership support for churches all over the nation to open their arms to young women with unplanned pregnancies. Over 700 churches are using the program, and Amy and her organization is actually based right here nearby in North Texas. She's author of A Bump in Life, I like the title, True Stories of Hope and Courage During an Unplanned Pregnancy, as well as another book, Help Her Be Brave, Discover Your Place in the Pro-Life Movement, which will release next year. Amy resides in Arlington, Texas. She's been married for 22 years and has 4 children. Hi, Amy. Thank you for joining me.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's so good to have you. And of course, your organization, I love how that you have just made it so that it can multiply itself and is doing so. But just go back to the beginning. Why did you start the organization Embrace Grace?
Well, I had an unplanned pregnancy myself, and I was terrified to tell my parents, and I almost had an abortion because of just fear. And so I ended up hyperventilating and passing out in the abortion room before they did the procedure. And so I decided to keep my baby, and I tried to go back to church after that. And it's kind of like the elephant in the room. People don't know whether to say congratulations or I'm sorry, so they don't say anything. And you just feel alone in a crowd of people. And the father of the baby, he felt the same way. We had decided to get married, and we had a hard time finding a pastor that would marry us because of, one pastor said, I can't because you guys have sinned, and so I can't bless this marriage. And so it was just a lot of shame around that. And I really stopped going to church for about 10 years, and me and my husband, we just didn't go. And so we finally felt like we started to go. We actually go to Gateway Church here in the area. And that was the first time when Jess was about 10 years old. We tried it, and we're like, okay, this is where we need to be. And God started healing our hearts, and we were growing closer to the Lord. But I really started realizing the power that the church has in helping women in this situation. I wish that I would have had the thought when I first found out I was pregnant. I wish I would have had the thought, maybe I need to go to church and talk to a pastor or talk to someone about what I should do. Like, it was the last place I wanted to go to when I was trying to make that decision. I was like, I already feel bad enough about myself as it is. Why would I want to go there? And I just really thought through, like, why is that? Why, whenever we're, it's a shame, I know, but like, why isn't the church one of the first places a girl runs to in that situation?
Yeah, it really should be. Do you think things are changing?
Yeah, for sure. Like, definitely when I hear from older people people used to like make women stand in front of the whole congregation and confess their sin. And it's like, why just that sin and not other sins? Why is that the one that you have to do that? And so the abortion rate is exactly the same inside the church as it is outside. There's no difference. And so women don't feel like they can go and talk to someone to get help. So that really just inspired, like, we need support groups. We need healing groups for these women with unplanned pregnancies. And so we started it at Gateway Church. And it just grew and grew and grew. And other churches started calling us saying, this is really cool. Will you show us how to do it too? And then that was when the nonprofit was launched in 2012 to really equip and give these churches the tools to help welcome these girls in and to help just get them back on their feet, to disciple them, to empower them as women to be the moms that God created them to be, whether they choose to place their baby for adoption or parent. And so it's been amazing. So we're now in over 700 churches in 47 states and 10 countries, and we just provide the curriculum for the moms. And a lot, there's some girls that come from within the church, but a lot of the girls also just come from like partnerships with pregnancy centers in communities, and they refer girls to the churches to go for support and help and all of that. So it's been amazing to see God work in and through the churches to be able to help save lives and help make abortion unthinkable for some of these women that it's like, why would I need to have an abortion when there's so much love and support that's out there that the church can provide to them?
So, Amy, how does it work? Because you talk about a curriculum that you've developed, but does someone teach the curriculum, or is the girl supposed to do it online, or is it kind of a combination of both? Do people come? Is there some sort of encouragement for people at the church to come around and come alongside?
Yeah, so it's a tool for the churches. So someone would just lead a small group, just like you would lead any kind of small group at your church, and then the girls come. Now, this is pre-COVID. It's definitely kind of shifted a little bit the way every church is different, but they so it's a 12-week digital curriculum. You just press play, but there is a leader that is a member of that church that would facilitate the class. And so they would go through it together, and the teachings are about 20 minutes. And then the leader they have like handouts, and we equip them with all of the tools of how to like finish out the class, how to talk to the girls, tell their own stories and things like that. So we just kind of help guide them along and give that church all that they need to host that group at their church.
So, and you've talked about helping the girls that come up with an unplanned pregnancy, and then helping them through after the baby's born. And what do you do? What is your experience with regard to what most girls in the church do between the two options of putting the child up for adoption or raising that child themselves? I mean, you raised your little boy. Was it a little boy?
Yeah, and he's getting married in 2 days.
Amazing. Oh,
I know.
That's such a wonderful outcome.
I know.
So you raised him, and, that's worked out, and you have 3 other children, and you have a marriage. Mm-hmm. So is that what you encourage, or do you kind of give people the pros and cons of everything? And what's the ratio between those who raise children themselves and those who adopt out?
Well, I think that most women for sure choose to parent. Adoption still, we have a lot of work to do as far as just changing the stigma around that. I just feel like women that sacrifice their body for 9 months to save a baby's life, when it comes between adoption and abortion, and that's a lot of times the girls are thinking through those things, that they choose adoption. Like, what an amazing selfless decision to do that. But there's a lot of uncertainties around that. There's one organization that I love that's called Brave Love, and they're really putting the word out about what is adoption, because a lot of these girls, they'll say, I don't know. Adoption seems kind of weird. I don't know how that works. And there's just so much uncertainty. So we never want to persuade them one way or another. We just put all of the information out there and let them choose. Mm-hmm. If I had to guess with our Embrace Grace girls, I would say like 98% choose to parent, and just a few choose adoption. And the ones that choose to parent, we throw them a big baby shower the church does as part of the Embrace Grace program. And the moms that choose to place their baby for adoption, we throw them, after they place their baby, something called a celebration of life shower. And it's just honoring them and loving on them and making them feel special, buying them things that, we had one girl that was in hair school, and when you're in hair school, you have to buy a lot of tools when you're done, your hair tools, and they're really expensive. So everyone kind of rallied around her and got her the hair tools and new clothes, and just, it's a new season for her. And so just honoring her in that way, for that. But definitely parenting, is always the best option if it can work out. But adoption is great as well if it's between adoption and abortion. Adoption is always going to be a better option than abortion.
I think what you've done has contributed to what you say, that 98% are keeping their babies and mm-hmm. raising them themselves. And that sounds like an impossible task unless you have help. And that's what you've done. You've set up the network that can help, haven't you?
Yeah, there's one time I talked with a girl that is an atheist in California, and she had asked me to speak at Berkeley, and she's pro-life. So she leads a lot of pro-life efforts, and she's amazing, but she's a pro-life atheist. And so she asked me to come speak at Berkeley. She was having pro-life speakers all day, and she said, will you come speak? I was like, well, sure. I talk about pro-life and pro-love in the church. Like, are you sure you want me to speak? Because we'll talk about God a lot. And she said, yeah, I don't believe in your God, but I believe in the power of your people. And if your people would actually do something, this issue wouldn't be an issue anymore.
Wow.
We have the manpower on our side because we have over 300,000 churches in America. And I was like, oh my goodness, that is crazy.
You are putting those kids to those churches to work. We're going to continue this conversation with Amy Ford right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. My guest is Amy Ford. She is president and co-founder of Embrace Grace Incorporated. And Amy, tell me about, because when someone is coming up pregnant and trying to make this decision of what to do, decides to keep her baby or perhaps put the baby out for adoption in another family, she's obviously, her walk with the Lord, isn't what it needs to be at that point, and she needs lots of grace, but she also needs discipleship. She may not even be a believer. She needs to grow in the Lord, along with this big challenge of raising a child alone, if that's what she's doing. So, it looks like you've got that need in mind too with your ministry.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's definitely discipleship, but it's also introducing women to Jesus as well, because we do have girls that have been raised in the church, but then we also have a lot of girls that come, and maybe they're just coming because they need community, or maybe they're just coming because they want the free stuff for the baby shower. But we are going to use this opportunity to share the gospel and just really help them get back on their feet. And there's a lot of healing that happens in their hearts, a lot of freedom. It's really like a freedom ministry, going even over past hurts and wounds and really trying to help. We're not there to like talk about the symptom, of whatever is going on. We want to get to the root of their heart and really help them heal and introduce them to Jesus so that he can heal their heart. So it's definitely a great program that's talking to both and discipling both. And we have Embrace Life for after they have their baby that also goes another 22 weeks. That's doing more, helping with more practical. It definitely has identity and value and worth as the core, but it's also just about dating and purity and financial stewardship and time management and all of the things that a new single mom that is just trying to survive, each day. It really helps equip her to be the mom that God created her to be. And we hope that they'll just get integrated in the church, raise their kids in the church, go on Sunday mornings, and we want to welcome them into a spiritual family. It's not just a class. It's something we would love to do their whole life with them as the church.
Well, that's what the church should be. And, I've seen a few cases where people have come around someone and they've had the baby and you've helped them early on. And then all of a sudden you don't see the girl anymore. She's gone.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds like you've been very intentional about giving every opening an opportunity and making it beneficial to stay in the body of Christ.
Sure. I mean, pro-life, you could vote a certain way and have a stance. Pro-life is like a stance, but pro-love, that's a word we use a lot. Pro-love is an action, and it's not just about the baby, it's about the mom, because if we can really love on her, then the baby will be just fine if we focus on her. So we want to just it's love that changes people, and it's God's kindness that leads us to repentance. And so for her to feel God's love through his people and for her to really encounter that helps transform her. And so we say it's a pro-whole life movement, not just pro-life and pro-birth. It's for her whole life if she'll allow it.
Yeah, and churches really need the help. I think churches often, they would, especially if they're coming from a pro-life standpoint, which most of our evangelical churches and Catholic churches do, but they don't know, they don't have the steps and how to do it. And so sometimes the efforts to love someone aren't long lasting. And I love how you're institutionalizing it and, bringing it into the life of the church.
Yeah, I think a lot of churches kind of stay away from this topic because they feel like it's political. But loving people should never be off the table. That's what we are as a church. A church without the broken is a broken church. And so we really need to be welcoming them in and using this opportunity to help them get back on their feet. And they're really at a crossroads a lot of times of like, should I spend time with the friends that, have been leading me in the wrong direction? Or they really kind of evaluate them at this point in their life. A lot of their friends leave and they feel alone. So this is, it's always a great opportunity to share the gospel, always. But this is a unique time when they're really kind of reflecting on what has gotten them to this point, and they're really wanting a change. And so it's great time for the church to jump in and say, we're here for you and we can help.
Ladies and gentlemen, you can go to pointofview.net, click through on Amy's picture, and then you can go through to the website and find out more about Embrace Grace Ministries. But Amy, how do you find the people that need your help, and how do they find you?
Okay, so we have a website, embracegrace.com. And there is a zip code finder. You put in your zip code, and all of the Embrace Grace groups in your local area pop up. If there's a girl that has an unplanned pregnancy, or maybe one of your listeners knows someone that's experiencing an unplanned pregnancy, you can find a church near you. Just put in that information. It has the church's name. It has the leader's name, the leader's phone number, and email. So you or her can reach out and get her connected to that group. And if anyone's interested in starting a group, we have all that information also on our website. You can fill out the little form online, and it will email you a starter guide immediately about what it looks like to start Embrace Grace at your church.
Wow, how wonderful. That's great. So what about your financial support to keep your ministry going? Can people, I'm sure you've got workers, people giving and volunteering. So how do you get involved if you would be interested in doing that?
Yeah, for sure. We have our national offices here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. It's in Hearst, and so we always need volunteers for putting together love boxes, which is something that we use to we give it to women that may be experiencing an unplanned pregnancy to hopefully inspire her to choose life, and it's super sweet. So we have people come up here and put those together. We have lots of volunteer opportunities, and then also donating. We are a nonprofit, a 501c3, and we run from donors. So we would love your support in that way too. We have 15 on staff here at the national office, and then we have hundreds of leaders all over the nation that we're equipping to lead Embrace Grace.
I love this idea of a love box. It's a gift. It says the contents are a letter of hope, a journal with writing prompts encouraging her to be fearless, a best gift after ever onesie, and also a Bump in Life book, the book that you wrote. You've got another book coming out next year. What are your hopes for that?
Oh, I'm super excited. It's called Help Her Be Brave, Discover Your Place in the Pro-Life Movement. And it's published with Moody Publishing, and we're just praying that it really gives lots of practical and inspiring ideas that will help someone. A lot of people are like, I want to get involved in the pro-life movement, but I have no idea how. Do I just Google it? So there's lots of inspiring stories, but then also lots of practical ideas of how you can use the strengths and gifts that God placed inside of you to help save lives. If you're nurturing, or if you're more of an advocate, or maybe you're an attorney, or maybe you want to serve at a pregnancy center or a maternity home, or there's hundreds of ideas of what you can do to be a part of the pro-life movement. So this book, we hope, will be like an action-inspired book that someone will read it and say, okay, I'm ready to get involved, and this is what I can do with my life to make a difference and help save lives.
Amy, when the book comes out, would you please remember to contact us? I would love to have you. COVID hopefully will be to the point where you could actually come to our Dallas studio. I would love to interview on that book when it comes out. So, don't forget us. Please contact us.
Yes.
All right. Amy Ford, thank you so much for joining me today and for this wonderful ministry. I hope folks take advantage of it as they've heard about it here on Point of View. God bless you, Amy.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, next up, first of all, go to the website, pointofview.net. You will see Amy's picture. You'll see more about her, and then you can click through to the website of Embrace Grace and find out more. I know that a lot of you, may not be in the situation yourself, but you know someone who is that could actually use the services. So I encourage you to do that. Next up, we've got a lot to talk about, but especially it's going to be fun to talk about the relationships between mothers and daughters. You won't want to miss it.
The year 2020 has been filled with problems, or let's just call them challenges. Before I get into that, we want to thank you. We just passed the end of our fiscal year, and many stepped up in a very big and sacrificial way, showing just how much they believe that Point of View is needed as we head into the last half of this year. And that's where our new challenge comes in. At the last minute, a friend stepped up with a surprising $50,000 matching challenge, and listeners matched it. But after that, yet another friend, knowing how important this year is, put down another $50,000 challenge, and because we were so close to deadline, said we could extend it just a bit to July 15th. As our nation deals with so many issues, make sure that Point of View can be a strong voice for truth by helping us complete that second match. Double your investment by giving at pointofview.net/time or call 1-800-347-5151. The clock is ticking. Pointofview.net/time. That's TIME. Pointofview.net/time or 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Thank you for joining me for Point of View. You know, the Supreme Court sometimes, well, at least this time, this session saved some of its best decisions for the religious segment of the population, the Christians, for last, because we've had some disappointments with some of the court decisions. 272 decisions today that uphold religious liberty came down. I'll talk about them in just a minute, but in the next segment, we're going to begin a discussion of a new book out called Mended, Restoring the Hearts of Mothers and Daughters, by a mother and daughter team, Blythe Daniel and Helen McIntosh. And, you know, the most beautiful and the most volatile relationship is often between a mother and a daughter. We're going to talk about that. So stay tuned for that. Call your friends, especially if they're moms and daughters. But I think everyone will be interested in that one, since everybody has a mother or had one. Ladies and gentlemen, also later in the program, we're going to talk about the Bostock Supreme Court decision, which was a big disappointment. It was the one that added employment protections that were, according to the Civil Rights Act of 1964, given on the basis of sex for women. That was a momentous law in 64, mostly to protect blacks, and also added the categories of women. And it just helped women in so many ways. Well, of course, as we know, we've discussed here on the program, the Supreme Court changed things and added the categories sexual orientation and sexual and gender identity to those categories for employment protections, which really infringes on the rights of believers who are business owners. How did we get there? We're going to talk with Glenn Murdock. He is a former justice on the Alabama Supreme Court, and also what are the implications for the future of that decision. He goes deep, and we're going to talk with Glenn Murdock about that in the last hour, the second hour of this national broadcast. But I just did want to mention these 272 decisions. One, the Little Sisters of the Poor have been fighting for 9 years to be exempt from the contraceptive mandate in Obamacare, in the Affordable Care Act, that they would have to provide contraception through their the health insurance that they provide their employees. And the Little Sisters of the Poor is a group that helps elderly, and they're nuns, and it's just been an absurd part of Obamacare that stayed with us. It went up to the Supreme Court and was sent back down to lower courts. It came back up. And today there's a 7-2 decision that protects the rights of nonprofits, because Hobby Lobby protected businesses. This protects nonprofits from this mandate by the Affordable Care Act. Donald Trump tried to remedy this by issuing an executive order that gave the right to these nonprofits to follow their own religious mandates and not to have to provide contraception. You know, a lot of it is because contraception sometimes can cause an abortion. It works as an abortifacient. But, and also just Catholics, you know, there's something very, very egregious about Catholics having to provide contraception. So this was a good conscience decision. It was a 7-2 decision and a good religious liberty decision. And then another decision is called Guadalupe. Let me see if I can find this information from Texas Values on this, because they wrote something very good. It really upholds the religious schools and organizations' rights to choose who has a religious mission within their organization. It's going to also make it difficult for radical LGBT activists to use that Bostock employment decision to infiltrate nonprofit organizations. So that's good too. But in Our Lady of Guadalupe versus Morrissey Beru, the court affirmed the ministerial exception, which protects more than just ministers, also including employees within the core mission of an organization, like teachers. So this protects the organization's right to hire, fire, to keep their employees within their faith tradition and within the activities that go along with the faith tradition, so that the federal government can't come in and say, you have to hire this person, you can't fire this person. So that's a good decision for religious liberty. I've done a sort of a short job of explaining those, and Kelly Shackelford, Lathan, Watson, Kirby will do a much better job of doing that on Friday on our weekend edition. So I hope that you will join us then. But it's good because we've had some disappointments by the court on a couple of cases, more than that, I think, along the way. So it's good to hear the announcements here at the end of some better ones. Well, I wanted to also just mention to you, and I'm sure Kirby has talked about President Trump's speech at Mount Rushmore, and it was like two different speeches, one the media talked about and one that actually happened. And so it was just amazing because I did not read the speech for a couple of days. It was the weekend, and it was the 4th of July weekend, so it was a busy time, and I should have watched it, but I didn't. But the media and, the mainstream media talking about a dark, divisive speech, and then, when you really read the speech or watched the speech, you saw a 4th of July patriotic speech, an ode to achievement of Americans, and then words like this: no nation has done more to advance the human condition than the United States of America, and no people have done more to promote human progress than the citizens of our great nation. The other side, though, wanted to revise our history, but Trump said their goal is not a better America. Their goal is to end America. Of this speech, Tony Perkins from Family Research Council said it was a speech of a man who realized it wasn't just his presidency at stake, but his country. And I'm glad that we're seeing some strong statements come out of the White House. It's been certainly on their hearts and minds, and there's been action taken with regard to trying to help these cities with all the violence and destruction going on in some of our cities across the country. But to hear this speech on the 4th of July, and then before going off on vacation on the break that happened, Senator Mike Lee tried to get a resolution condemning the mob violence. But the interesting part about that is the Democrats wouldn't do it unless there was language inserted blaming the president. So they didn't pass this condemnation of the violence, and they left town. And unfortunately, that's the way the Senate left it. We need some strong reaction. We need to get all of this violence under control. The idea of it now, most of the violent action that's taking place, has less and less, I think, to do with concern about racism and more to do with enacting a liberal is the wrong word, far left radical policies and really changing our country, just about every institution and every part of it. It's huge. It's really a revolution. And so, we have to act. And it's amazing that there's an election coming up, and the time between now and that election is the time that this White House and our Congress needs to act to get control of this, to get the people that are fomenting it basically stopped and punished. So there'll be a lot more about that later. But next up, we're going to talk about mothers and daughters. Stay with us for more of Point of View.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Stephen Moore is an economics columnist who has written for the Wall Street Journal and National Review. His recent Washington Examiner column talked about how the pandemic and the lockdown highlighted the differences between the right and the left. He discussed 11 differences. Let's just look at 3. He says the right believes that stay-at-home orders and social distancing requirements are counterproductive and should be repealed safely and immediately. The left believes that those orders must stay in place, but should only apply to those on the right, not to liberal protesters. And over the last few months, we've seen how inconsistently some governors and other political leaders have applied shelter-in-place and stay-at-home orders. He says the right believes the best way to revive the economy is to incentivize a dormant workforce to get back on the job. The left believes that the best way to revive the economy is to pay people more money not to work than to work. And in previous commentaries, I've discussed how providing generous benefits to unemployed people has become a disincentive for them to return to work. He also says the right believes that there are limits to how much government can spend and even borrow to avoid national bankruptcy and financial ruin. The left believes that trillions of dollars of added spending and debt are advisable and benign. Frankly, this is one place where I disagree with Stephen Moore. I wish there were more people on either the right or the left who express much concern about government spending. Yes, we need to help people and businesses that are hurting, but there will be a financial price to pay for all this spending. What we have been through these many months is unprecedented, and the pandemic and the lockdown have also exposed the clear differences between the right and the left. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I'm very excited about my next interview because in the last couple of days, I've been reading their book. It's a mother-daughter team. Blythe Daniel is the daughter. Helen McIntosh is the mother. And the name of the book is Mended, Restoring the Hearts of Mothers and Daughters. I'm a daughter. We all are. And I'm also a mother and grandmother. And so there was a lot in this book that I just loved, and I think you will too. Blythe Daniel is a literary agent, and she's also a marketer in publishing. She speaks at writers' conferences, on podcasts and webinars, and she's written for several magazines. She directed marketing for Thomas Nelson Publishers, and she's the daughter of Dr. Helen McIntosh, who also joins us. Helen McIntosh is a counselor, a speaker, an educator, and she's authored books on self-image and conflict resolution, and you see a lot of that throughout this book. She also has work in several magazines, and she has 2 children, including Blythe, who joins us. And she and her husband are grandparents 5 times over. Ladies, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, I'm so glad to have you. And, you know, when I was kind of teasing this interview, I quoted from you, which you say that the most beautiful and the most volatile relationship is often between a mother and a daughter. And Blythe, would you speak to that?
I sure will. You know, we are born and we imitate our mother, and what we grow up with affects, you know, how we make choices and how we parent our children someday. And so that relationship can be the most vulnerable because we're so impressionable, and we're hoping and we're taught to trust our mothers, and at some point there's confrontation. And so what we wanted to do in our book, Mended, is to help mothers and daughters to be able to have healthy conversations without confrontation and to heal from broken or difficult relationships. And sometimes we don't even realize that there's past hurts and words that have crept in. And so how do you address those things delicately but honestly? And so that's where we were hoping to go with women through this book.
There was so much that's practical there. I got some ideas for my own life, which I'll talk about later. But Helen, something that caught my attention in the introduction, and also you unpack this later, but it goes to the importance with dealing with some kind of a break, chasm, or difficulty that arises between the mother and the daughter. And this is a very strong statement, but it rings true. You're right. Generations are affected by how you and your mother react or interact with one another. So it's not just your relationship; it affects others, doesn't it?
It really does. I would have to say, Penna, that we all are patterners, and we, generations after generations, the behaviors are repeated. And so we just need to get real serious about repair. And so Blythe and I really love the principles that God has taught us, because we want so much to help people that have gotten disconnected over years and years and layers of broken dreams, broken conversations, we say, and broken relationships. And it is such an easy repair as far as starting over again. And we don't encourage people to go way back into history, but they can start now and ask one another, would they like to repair the relationship or restore the relationship? And then we give them the language to start. So we're trying to make it simple to start over.
This is a guidebook that way, and I love the way you word things, and the way you give. This is the thing that I really took from the book. You give suggestions on the way to approach the conversation, whatever the hard thing is that you're approaching, or you want to repair the relationship with your mother, but you need to ask permission. And then you're not responsible for the other person. You're just responsible for what you do about it, right?
Good job, Penna.
I'm summarizing some things, but it was a great principle. I think it's just key.
Yes, it really is. It's a winning way, and it's God's way, is to enter conversations with permission. When we know that we're exhorting the person, the mother or daughter, or other family members that we're in relationship with, there's a lot of exhorting to be done over many days, but it's really helpful if we ask permission, if we could give some feedback and get invited into a conversation. And I share that it's real important, the first couple of words that you say. I call it the sandwich method. In other words, if you want to share something difficult, that would be the meat in the sandwich. But be sure and put on your top bun.
It's really fluffy and tasty, right?
A lot of sesame seeds. Yep.
Well, I had a wonderful mother. She's in heaven. She's been gone for 11 years, and I miss her. I remember the day that I realized my mom wasn't perfect. And I was actually pretty old by then because I had, as I said, a great mom. But we all find that out, Blythe. At some point, we find out that our mom is not perfect, don't we?
Yeah, we do, Penna. And, I think we have more appreciation for our moms, and we realize that they were doing the best they could when we become an adult and when we have our own children. I do remember being a teenager and feeling like that last year of high school that I just couldn't relate to my mom as much. I was so ready to move on to college and the life that I was dreaming of ahead of me that I put some space between us, and I really was ready to move ahead and felt like I didn't need my mom and dad as much. And so that was my way of coping with this idea of I needed to move on, and it hurt. Mom released me, which was really special, that she came to me and said, I don't want you to ever feel like I'm controlling you. This is before I left for college that summer. And what was so important to me in that statement was she said, if you feel like I'm controlling you, please tell me, Mom, that feels like control. So she gave me permission to tell her if I felt like there was something in our relationship that was causing damage or causing isolation or any of those things. And so I think that's so important for us to remember. We can do that with our daughters. We can even do that with our mothers. Maybe some listeners have mothers that they may be in a place of taking care of or spending more time with during this season of life. And it's never too late to go back and repair places that have devastated you and that maybe your mom doesn't think about anymore, but you think about. And it's so healthy to talk about these things while we can, because none of us want to live with any type of regret of, I wish I would have said that, or I wish I would have brought that up, and like we said earlier, it does affect the generations following us when we don't take care of the things between us. So it's super healthy to look at our relationships and take care of those things while we can.
Did you do a lot of that then after your mother gave you permission?
Over the years after that, I did. I sure did. And I think that probably where I came to my mom and said, Mom, I've messed up in this area, and I need you to help. And I wasn't willing to admit that earlier, that I needed her help. And then I think, primarily for as a young mom, I wanted to feel like I was getting it right. And she would ask me, is it okay for me to share something with you? And sometimes I'd say, no, not really. And I really wanted to get it right as a new mom. I didn't want to be seen as being deficient in any way. But you know what? There was a time where we talked about what was her responsibility, what was my responsibility, and some of those things can be awkward between mothers and daughters, but you feel so much better when you're able to address what's between you. And it was a really strong, healthy point for us when we were able to go back as me being married and with children and being able to say some things with each other that we really had never had to say in our relationships, but we asked for forgiveness, and we really mended our relationship further than we had ever thought we needed to. But it was something that new territory for us, but that's what happens with mothers and daughters, and it's so important, again, to make sure that you're at a good place with each other.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's really the purpose of this book, Mended, Restoring the Hearts of Mothers and Daughters. Let me open up the phones. It's 800-351-1212. If you have a situation that you may want to present before Blythe and Helen, a question. You've actually got a trained counselor on the line with us right now, Helen McIntosh. So, if you've got mother-daughter issues and problems, give us a call. We'd love to hear from you, 800-351-1212. And I have so many more questions for Helen and Blythe. And so you please stay with us. In fact, if you've got people that that may be struggling with an issue with mom and daughter, or a mother-daughter relationship conflict or question, this might be the time to listen and maybe give us a call. Again, 800-351-1212. My guests are Blythe Daniel and Helen McIntosh. We'll be back for more of Point of View.
The year 2020 has been filled with problems, or let's just call them challenges. Before I get into that, we want to thank you. We just passed the end of our fiscal year, and many stepped up in a very big and sacrificial way, showing just how much they believe that Point of View is needed as we head into the last half of this year. And that's where our new challenge comes in. At the last minute, a friend stepped up with a surprising $50,000 matching challenge, and listeners matched it. But after that, yet another friend, knowing how important this year is, put down another $50,000 challenge, and because we were so close to deadline, said we could extend it just a bit to July 15th. As our nation deals with so many issues, make sure that Point of View can be a strong voice for truth by helping us complete that second match. Double your investment by giving at pointofview.net/time or call 1-800-347 5151. The clock is ticking. Pointofview.net/time. That's TIME, pointofview.net/time, or 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Penna Dexter.
We're digging into this book, Mended, Restoring the Hearts of Mothers and Daughters, with its authors, a mother-daughter team, Blythe Daniel and Helen McIntosh. And Blythe, I just want to talk about this whole idea of being right, because we all want to be right, of course. We tend to want to, at least. But I found there are times in my raising of my daughter, I've got 2 sons and a daughter. She's the youngest. But there were times when I was right, and it turns out there really wasn't a right or wrong in the argument. It was just preferences. So that can be one thing. And another thing is sometimes the daughter is actually right. I used to think, my mom was always right until I found out she wasn't. And so sometimes the mom can learn from the daughter. And so how do we, avoid big arguments before we actually figure out that, we've got to give up our right to be right?
That is so true. And, I think that we always need to remember that the relationship is more important than who is right. And we can die on a hill of saying, this is how it's going to be, and I'm right, and I'm the mom. And we've crushed the other person, and we've really driven a wedge in the relationship. And so, we do learn from each other, and I've learned a lot from my daughters. And I think that I've realized as a mom how maybe you feel this way too, Penna, that, you don't know as much as we think we do. And I've had to ask my daughters, for their forgiveness for the way I've come across, or from assuming something because I just felt like I was right because I've got more years of life, right? I've got more experience. But what really stifles relationships is expectations and a sense of ownership, or a sense of I have this and I'm right. And so, expectations are also real killers of relationships, because what's happening there is that we're expecting someone else to either come through for us or to meet our needs. And so sometimes we want to be the one showing the upper hand of, hey, I'm right, and I expect this from you. And what that really does, again, just really makes the other person feel like they're not coming through. And then that can further drive your relationship apart. So always putting the relationship and honoring the relationship, even if it means admitting that you're wrong. And even if the other person doesn't admit that they're wrong, we still want to take ownership for our actions and our thoughts. And that's what this book really invites readers to think about, because it's not something that we normally think about. We want other people to own whatever's going through their minds and come to us and say, you were right, but it just doesn't happen, does it?
No, it doesn't. It rarely happens, and it shouldn't always happen either. So we can bounce off and learn from one another. Let's take a call here, Helen and Blythe, and let's see. It's Jenny who is listening in from, actually she's listening in from Alaska. And Jenny, thanks for calling in.
Thank you.
What's your question?
Well, I have sort of a very complicated situation, and I'm not sure where to go from here. I have a stepdaughter. She's a lovely girl, but she's drifted away and decided a lot of things that worry us as Christian parents. She was deceptive and got into a lot of trouble on the internet, things we were really concerned about. And she ended up leaving and going to her mom's. And I just feel like there's a lot unsaid, and I'm not sure how to reach her in a godly manner. I'm trying to sort out just through the rubbish. She's got 4 younger siblings and her dad, and she's gotten to a point where she pretty much doesn't communicate with us. And I'm sure that to some extent there's quite a few people around the world that have dealt with this kind of thing before. But what would be my next step with that? She's in the wrong, but I still want to try to draw her back. If that makes sense.
Helen, do you have any thoughts on this?
I would love to dive in. Yes. Hello to the listener, and boy, I see your heart for reconciliation, and I pray that'll happen.
I'm having a little bit of a hard time hearing you.
Oh, really? I'm so sorry. I'll try and speak up. Is that better?
Okay. Thank you.
I see your heart for reconciliation, and there's much ground to plow. But one of the sentences that Blythe and I really feel strongly about is a very simple invitation where you'd say, honey, what do you think we need to do to make things better? And really then the ball would be in her court. You're not straightening her out. You're not trying to go over the 30 issues that are between you, but you're inviting her to say, what she thinks might need to happen to make things better. It's just a start, and see what she says from that. But it's very respectful and welcoming. And once she might let you back in, you might go to a trained counselor that could help you go through all the barriers that have been there. But she will appreciate you're trying to rescue her and the relationship. It's just a sweet way of inviting her in.
I think it is too. Jenny is actually still listening, and I wanted to say, Jenny, if you had trouble hearing, you can go back and just listen to this show again, and you probably will want to anyway because of Helen's sage advice. But if that connection was not good to hear, you can go back and listen again. But go ahead, Blythe.
Yeah, I just was going to say, Jenny, that oftentimes we've talked with women who the mother or the daughter has cut off communication, and they have been able to write a letter sharing their thoughts and what they would like to see in the relationship, and they've been able to mail a letter or text through another communicator that is in communication with the person. And one of the things that I love of what Mom says in our book is this phrase as well, and it says, I want us to be repaired. I want a good relationship with you. I want a relationship with you. What do you need to hear from me or see from me for us to be repaired? I want to clear up any offenses on my part.
It's so non-threatening.
It is. And you know what, Jenny, for someone who has done the leaving, you may be very in the minute position of maybe, she's done maybe 95% of the wrong things, and maybe you've only had a 5%, but you're taking responsibility for that 5%. It does invite others once we break that barrier and are able to say, I want to own my offenses, or I want to own anything that I've done to hurt you. It does, most of the time we've heard women say that'll open up the other person to be able to communicate back in some form. So maybe there's even a video that you could share if letters are not possible. But I just want to encourage you to reach out to her, and we'll be praying for you as you do those steps or what God calls you to do. But thank you for sharing your heart with us.
Thank you so much, Jenny. I want to ask you a question, ladies, about I'm sorry, because I can say it very easily, and yet sometimes it's I'm sorry just to get peace, or not ever to really take ownership of that thing that you did to offend, because you add one little word, but I'm sorry, but, and then you make an excuse for what you did, and so help us with that tendency. Maybe Helen, you could start.
When we say I'm so sorry, that's a real good piece. But what I think the other person always longs to hear is for you to actually name the offense. I mean, they're sitting there knowing what it is, but it's an extra bonus when we spill it out. And then thirdly, to ask the question, will you forgive me? So a really preferable statement would be, I was so wrong to do such and such, or I was so unloving in this situation, and I am so sorry. Will you forgive me? And those three pieces break down the wall. It's unbelievable, but it really works. And once they give you an answer, your plate's clean, really.
Yeah,
Right,
even if they don't
that?
respond in a good way or the positive way, your plate's clean.
Yes, you really are. Your responsibility, your major responsibility is clear. It's done.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, do you see why I think this is an important book? Because the tools in here there's something all of us can use in relationships. And these mother-daughter relationships, I think they're going to be very powerful as people begin to read and apply this book, Blythe and Helen. We're going to continue discussing it and take your calls, 800-351-1212. But I think I really want to encourage people to get the book because it's a tool. And you can go back to some of the chapters when you're facing the various issues that are contained in the book. It's really a treasure. Ladies and gentlemen, stick with us because we've got another segment with Helen McIntosh and Blythe Daniel talking about restoring the hearts of mothers and daughters. And it's just, if you're a kid with a mom, it's a good book with a lot of good advice and wisdom. We'll be back with more Point of View.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
I'm speaking with Blythe Daniel and Helen McIntosh about their book, Mended, Restoring the Hearts of Mothers and Daughters. And we were talking before the break about forgiveness and the importance of forgiveness, asking forgiveness. And sometimes you don't get that forgiveness you ask for, but it's very important to forgive. And to get forgiveness is it's a wonderful thing to get for what you've done, for what you've actually asked for forgiveness for. But sometimes we're not asked to forgive by people who have wronged us. But let me just go to you, Helen. We can forgive without being asked. Why is it important for us to do that?
Yes, that is a powerful life principle, isn't it? You know, God just will honor that even if the other person does not ever ask. If we release them, we find out that we were the ones that were prisoners, not vice versa. So it is a powerful principle. And so if your listeners are feeling like they're waiting for the other person to ask forgiveness, if there's any way that you can be the starter and take responsibility for even your 5%. Blythe and I talk about the 5%, 95% rule. And we often know that someone is 95% wrong in our lives. But if we're willing to ask forgiveness for the 5, it sure gets the ball rolling. And it's just the right thing to do. God is really honored when we humble ourselves and do that. It's a great connection.
Something
and as I said, we become free.
Yes, it frees us. Something that comes through loud and clear in the book is that Blythe believes that she had a wonderful mother, and that you put into practice a lot of these principles you're telling us about as you raised her. But you yourself had a lot to get through with your mom, Helen. And so I don't know that you were really asked by her to forgive for some of that, but you've forgiven her anyway, haven't you?
I did. She never could ask me for forgiveness, but I did. At some point, God says, "Will you just choose to forgive her, and it's done, over and done with?" And that way, you can move on to more life. And this is why family relationships are so important to get healed, is because that disconnection that happens over just small things grows and grows and grows if it's not taken care of. And so it's a really wise move to begin to just take one relationship at a time, one conversation at a time, and begin that wonderful possibility of restoration. And even if you don't know what to say, if you could just say, I really want to get restored. I don't know what to say or how to do it, but what do you think we need to do to make things better? I mean, that's just honest and humble, and great results will come.
Yeah, you're really putting the ball in her court. What do you think? What do I need to do to make this happen? Mm-hmm. It's really a sense of humility. Well, I want to
sometimes.
Go ahead,
I was just going to say, if someone, if you're listening and your mother or your daughter is no longer in your life, maybe they're no longer living, or they have decided not to have a relationship with you, it's still really possible for you to receive healing. That we weren't meant to receive healing from each other. We were meant to receive healing from God, right? Like a restored heart towards God as a way to walk closer to each other. And so that takes place when we're able to say, we can even say this out loud, "I choose to forgive you for," and then fill in the blank. So even saying those words out loud and making it a prayer to God will help you walk around with the freedom that you need in your life. That our ability to forgive a mother or daughter determines how we're going to experience life, walking around free rather than with an enslaved mentality of still holding on to the things that have hurt us in the past. So it's still possible, even if that person's not in your life.
That is so freeing for a lot of people. I know that people listening are hearing that with relief. Let's take another call. This is Danielle in Missouri. Hi, Danielle. Thanks for calling. You're on Point of View.
Yes, hello. I'm just calling when I didn't hear your last guest, so that might have answered some of my questions. I just got on the very tail end of it, but I sometimes...
Our last caller, you mean?
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, well, go ahead with your question.
Well, my question is when is it time to just let, when you know that, because the relationship is a two-way street, and when you're the only one that calls and calls and calls and then goes over to see if they're okay, and you think that, you just are forbearance, and then...
So should there be an end to the forbearance?
Then you realize after you get hurt, and then...
Okay, I sense a lot of hurt. Can you, Helen, maybe give her... I know that one thing I've seen from the discussion with the call screener is that Danielle's daughter is cutting her off from her grandchildren. That's part of all this, but there's no response. So,
well, I think it was more like her acting like a teenager, and like she had cut me off. Oh, just don't call her back.
She's acting like a teenager.
Convenient and
yeah. Okay, let's let Helen give some wisdom, because I want to get some of this this wisdom into this conversation before the show ends. We don't have a lot of time.
Right.
Go ahead.
Well, you're so kind, and I sense the heaviness of your heart, and I'm so sorry for what you're walking through. Just a suggestion might be to ask God to show you what other steps that He might have you take. Because we don't want you to have any regrets, although He doesn't ask you to take on the whole weight, including her part. But one of my favorite verses is Galatians 6:13, and it says, where it's talking about the armor and the battle gear, and it says, and having done all, to stand. And there's a certain point where you know you've done all that you can, and then you stand. But there's probably still a lot. The pollen in Georgia is still with us.
Yeah.
My throat. But there's still probably a lot left to do. And the main thing, again, we're sentence happy. We love being able to say sentences, and it could be in a letter or a text, or said one-on-one. But if you could just say, I'd like so much for us to be restored. What do you think that we need to do to make things better? And that way, if there's anything, you're basically saying, if there's anything between us, would this other person share with you what that is? And once you've asked that, then, that's pretty much all you can do. But make sure that you say that you care for her unconditionally, that there are no strings attached. And I think things would be better. At least you know that you have done all that you can. I mean, none of us are to take on the responsibility of the whole relationship. It's two people having equal responsibility. I give in the book the example of the bumped cups, and you could picture.
I got to jump in, Helen, because we're coming up actually on the end of the hour, and I appreciate both of you joining me. I wish we had another hour. Thank you so much, Helen. And the book is Mended. Get the book, ladies and gentlemen. You will benefit. We'll be back.
The year 2020 has been filled with problems, or let's just call them challenges. Before I get into that, we want to thank you. We just passed the end of our fiscal year, and many stepped up in a very big and sacrificial way, showing just how much they believe that Point of View is needed as we head into the last half of this year. And that's where our new challenge comes in. At the last minute, a friend stepped up with a surprising $50,000 matching challenge, and listeners matched it. But after that, yet another friend, knowing how important this year is, put down another $50,000 challenge, and because we were so close to deadline, said we could extend it just a bit to July 15th. As our nation deals with so many issues, make sure that Point of View can be a strong voice for truth by helping us complete that second match. Double your investment by giving at pointofview.net/time or call 1-800-347-5151. The clock is ticking. Pointofview.net/time. That's TIME. Pointofview.net/time or 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information. about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Wow, that was a great interview. At least the folks that were interviewed did a great job, I think, in explaining the mother-daughter relationship and ways we can make it better. And I was sorry that I didn't get to say actually goodbye and thank them, because we had a caller that just really needed some advice, and the hour ended too quickly, which is so often the case here on Point of View. We've had a packed show today, so one thing I have neglected is to send you to pointofview.net to see the articles that we have been referencing. So let me do that now. It's pointofview.net. That's our website. We try to provide tools to back up the interviews and the topics that we discuss on Point of View. And we also offer the opportunity for you to donate to our ministry. We're listener supported. That's how we keep going, is through the gifts of our listeners. But I've put up there the Texas COVID snapshot that I discussed for those of you that may have been listening during the Dallas or the Texas hour. Many of you have not heard that, but it's really interesting and showing just some stats that are very revealing about where it stands in Texas. Yes, more cases. The death rate is one of the lowest death rates in the nation. So you'll see that. And then the other piece of news that I discussed, parents filing to homeschool crash North Carolina's website. In other words, because of COVID, people were homeschooling, and some of them really liked it. So they want to homeschool next year. And they can't even get through to the website that gets you that paperwork needed to do that right now in North Carolina. That's how popular it is. That's just one state, but it just goes to show that homeschooling turned out to be a good thing for a lot of families. And, of course, we talked about the president's White House event yesterday encouraging that schools should open across the country in the fall. And then there's another piece up there which I haven't discussed, but I really want to mention this. It's called Pastor or Parent, and it's by John Stone Street of the Colson Center, and along with Maria Bear. Breakpoint. It's really the Breakpoint commentary from yesterday, and I thought it was such a great encouragement to people that I wanted to pass it along to you. That's at pointofview.net. But what it talks about is pastoring and the pastors during COVID-19 and just what we're living through in this country today. And he says, Stone Street and Bear say that the pastoring is always a difficult job. I can't think of another job, in fact, in which someone is hired to do one thing, basically lead and disciple God's people, but evaluated on a completely different thing, namely growing the audience and the budget. And then they go on to say pastoring during coronavirus seems even more unenviable. You've got, of course, the Zoom services and trying to get that going, but also when to close down was a very tough decision. When to reopen is an even more difficult decision because different states have different guidelines. And, some people are going to be upset if you come back too soon. Some people are going to be upset if you're still not back. And I've seen that in so many churches that I know about. But if the pastor ignores or relaxes the guidelines, they're going to upset some people and not others. They're in a no-win position. So give your pastor some grace. And then another part of their challenge right now is navigating not only this global pandemic, but also the firestorms in the culture that are going on right now. And you have folks in the churches that are very concerned about racism, and they're speaking up loudly, and they may want the pastor to. And then, to the point of asking the white people in the congregation to apologize for being white. I hope no pastors are doing that. But, then the other side of it is this move by the left toward really changing everything in the country. And pastors say they don't want to get political, but there's so much in these efforts right now by the left that do concern the church. And especially when you think of the pushes to do things like defund police or destroy, wipe out the nuclear family and just raise kids in villages. I mean, so it's just a challenging time for pastors, let me put it that way. And pastors need to be true to their convictions in themselves, true to Scripture, and, basically take people through something that is going to help them deal biblically with the major challenges we have. So I would say pray for your pastors and give them a break when you talk to them and you've got a strong opinion. Understand that there are a lot of people in the church that have strong opinions. I've also put another article up, and it's one that we're going to discuss in the next segment with my guest, Glenn Murdock. And he is a former Alabama Supreme Court justice. He is very, very concerned about some of these cases, really culture-changing cases that have been decided in the Supreme Court. Last time I spoke with him, I think it's been a couple of years now, we talked about the Obergefell decision on same-sex marriage. It was quite a bit after the decision, so we were already beginning to see the repercussions. This time, we've had another decision. It's the Bostock decision, Bostock v. Clayton County, and we've discussed it here at Point of View. And it is such a powerful decision because it takes the wording in the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the protection on the basis of sex for women. And, of course, it moved that and added categories, the sexual orientation and also gender identity. And the basis for it was 3 cases put together. But the one that I think was, to me, the one to talk about was the one that had to do with Harris Funeral Home, where the funeral director went from being a male for many years, working there as the funeral director, and then deciding that he would begin to dress as a female and present as a female. And the owner of the funeral home fired him because he did not want that confusion, that whole drama being part of the process of grieving for families that were coming to the funeral home. It was a community-based funeral home that had been serving its community for a long time. The Supreme Court denied the funeral director the right to fire this employee. And they based it on the Civil Rights Act of 1964, stuffing into the definition of on the basis of sex, on the basis of gender identity, sexual identity, and on the basis of gender identity. Sexual orientation and gender identity. So the repercussions of this, first of all, how do we get there? We're going to ask our guests that. And then the repercussions of this could just be huge for the culture. And so what are those? And there's an article up, The Road to Bostock by Carl Truman from First Things. It's a very good article. You might want to read it, and we will discuss it here on Point of View. As I mentioned, we got a couple of good religious liberty decisions today, which Kelly, Lathan, and Kirby will discuss on Friday on our weekend edition, and you will get a good look at that from 2 attorneys and Kirby. I think what better team could you have to discuss those? But we can applaud those 2 decisions, but my heart is sad over the Bostock decision. I think it's going to lead to nothing good. And I know religious liberty could be protected in that, which is fine. But the definition of sex has changed, and it was really legislating from the bench and not in a good way. In fact, that's really never good. Justice Gorsuch wrote the opinion, and he certainly disappointed a lot of those who supported him. Anyway, we'll discuss it. We're going to go deep with this with Glenn Murdock, so stay with us for more of Point of View.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Stephen Moore is an economics columnist who has written for the Wall Street Journal and National Review. His recent Washington Examiner column talked about how the pandemic and the lockdown highlighted the differences between the right and the left. He discussed 11 differences. Let's just look at 3. He says the right believes that stay-at-home orders and social distancing requirements are counterproductive and should be repealed safely and immediately. The left believes that those orders must stay in place, but should only apply to those on the right, not to liberal protesters. And over the last few months, we've seen how inconsistently some governors and other political leaders have applied shelter-in-place and stay-at-home orders. He says the right believes the best way to revive the economy is to incentivize a dormant workforce to get back on the job. The left believes that the best way to revive the economy is to pay people more money not to work than to work. And in previous commentaries, I've discussed how providing generous benefits to unemployed people has become a disincentive for them to return to work. He also says the right believes that there are limits to how much government can spend and even borrow to avoid national bankruptcy and financial ruin. The left believes that trillions of dollars of added spending and debt are advisable and benign. Frankly, this is one place where I disagree with Stephen Moore. I wish there were more people on either the right or the left who express much concern about government spending. Yes, we need to help people and businesses that are hurting, but there will be a financial price to pay for all this spending. What we have been through these many months is unprecedented, and the pandemic and the lockdown have also exposed the clear differences between the right and the left. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. Thanks for sticking with us for this program. I don't think you're going to be sorry. We're going to dig into the Bostock decision, and my guest is Glenn Murdock. He was elected statewide 3 times by the people of Alabama. He was an Alabama Supreme Court justice, and he's been a strong voice for traditional values and also the rule of law on the Alabama appellate courts for 17 years, and he speaks nationally on religious liberty and the call of Christians to government and politics. I've spoken with him before. It's been a while. And Glenn, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, Penna, it's my pleasure and honor. Thank you.
Well, I spent a good part of the last segment explaining the Bostock versus Clayton County decision. We've explained it before on this program and, kind of wringing our hands about it. But I just thought about you when this came down, because you and I spoke about, it was 2 or 3 years after the Obergefell decision that we spoke, but you were so clear on some of the repercussions, and I thought we could talk about how we got here with the Bostock decision and also, what it could portend. And I'm so grateful that you were willing to come and talk to me about this. I did read again a concurrence of yours on Alabama Supreme Court marriage amendment decision, and I thought some of the things you said about that actually applied here. But just go ahead.
No, please.
I just wanted to jump right in because Justice Gorsuch wrote this Bostock opinion, and he sort of stuffed gender identity and sexual orientation into the definition of sex in the Civil Rights Act of 1964. He stuffed it in there sort of trying to not change the definition, but it seems to be having that effect.
Well, to go back to your next to last point, you're right. Bostock really is an extension of Obergefell. In Obergefell, the court wrote its own constitution, you might say, when it came to marriage. And what it's done in Bostock is write its own statute under that constitution. There are common themes between the two, as you alluded to a moment ago. Maybe I should say there is a common theme, one essential common theme, and that is the denial of objective truth. And that's what I think you and I spoke about a lot 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
That was about the time that I was retiring from the Supreme Court or leaving the Supreme Court to pursue other endeavors, which I'm still doing, just to make sure the record is straight for your listeners. But to borrow the words that Hamilton used in Federalist 78, a man can pass all the laws he wants, or courts can render all the judgments it wants, but in the end, neither the legislature nor the courts can change what Hamilton called the nature and reason of things set in place by the Creator. And I think that is what was happening in Obergefell when it came to the truth of what marriage was in nature. Excuse me. And I think that there are elements of that going on here as an extension. I would say this before we get too deep into that philosophical point, which I hope to explore with you before we finish today. But I would like to stop at the very beginning and just give a shout out, if you hadn't already done so, to Justice Alito.
Yeah.
The majority, in addition to denying truth, arguably, the majority deals a grievous blow to Antonin Scalia's beloved textualism. And what Justice Alito does is come to its defense with a tour de force, you might say, of textualism and logic and history and common sense. Scalia said that textualism means that you search for the meaning of a statute based on what reasonable and ordinary people at the time of its enactment would have understood it to mean. Thomas Jefferson, long before that, said, laws are made for men of ordinary understanding and should, therefore, be construed by the ordinary rules of common sense. On every question of construction, Jefferson said, carry ourselves back to the time when the court was adopted. When the law was adopted. Carry ourselves back to the time when the law was adopted and recollect the spirit manifested in the debates. And instead of trying what meaning may be squeezed out of the text, conform to the probable one in which it was passed. And that is what Justice Alito tries to do. Again, his effort is valiant. And it would, I think, encourage your readers to see one of our sitting justices writing with such clarity and common sense and reflecting their understanding of the world around them. Justice Alito starts his dissent, or this part of his dissent, by saying, we must ask whether ordinary Americans in 1964 would have thought that discrimination because of sex, quote unquote, meant that private employers were to be prohibited from hiring and firing practices based on, quote, sexual orientation or, quote, gender identification, unquote. Then what Justice Alito does, and this is just a piece of his opinion, but he goes through the landscape of American law and culture in 1964 at the time Congress enacted the Civil Rights Act. And I apologize to your listeners if you've already been through some of this.
Let's do it. We've talked about it, but we've not. That's why I wanted you to come to the microphone and just explain.
Sure.
Gorsuch, everybody was excited about him, and some people saw some concerns that knew things. But the fact that textualism was, he's the famous textualist, and yet he's made the argument to.
Right. There's textualism, and then there's textualism. What Scalia never meant to stray from what Jefferson said. Scalia focused on words and their meanings and plain meanings, but not divorced from the context of the time in which they were written on the paper. And that's what Jefferson was trying to emphasize. And so to that end, that's what Alito does. He goes back and he says this is Alito's list, not mine. In 1964, the American Psychiatric Association, in its most recent manual on mental disorders, deemed homosexuality a sexual deviation and a personality disorder. 4 years after the Civil Rights Act was adopted, in 1968, the manual continued to refer to it as sexual deviation. In 1964, according to Alito, sodomy was a crime in every state except Illinois. In 1964, according to Alito, Congress had on the books a law making sodomy a felony in the District of Columbia. And it could lead to a civil commitment of an indefinite duration. In 1964, federal agencies could deny homosexuals employment because of their sexual orientation. They could be, and they were, routinely denied security clearances. It was common for states to ban or bar homosexuals from serving as teachers in our public schools. The great state of California had such a law.
Amazing.
In 1964. Yeah. Florida had such a law. And in fact, in and around 1964, it was in the process of revoking 85 teaching certificates of public school teachers in their elementary, secondary, and university ranks. We know that in 1964 and for decades thereafter, homosexuals were barred from serving in the military. But the most amazing thing and all of this is Justice Alito's explanation of the landscape, the context in which Congress passed the 64 Civil Rights Act, and therefore what they might or might not have meant when they talked about a ban on sexual discrimination. He says the most amazing, he didn't say this, I think it's the most amazing thing he points out, is that for almost 5 decades after the Civil Rights Act was adopted, 48 years, for 48 years, the one federal agency that is supposed to be the expert on the Civil Rights Act, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EEOC, the agency that is supposed to construe it and apply it and enforce it, took the official position that it had nothing to say about sexual orientation. And that is the federal agency adopted, enacted, created by the same Congress that created the act that we're now trying to construe. When it comes to gender identity and the context in which Congress was speaking in 1964, I hate to do this, Penna, but can I just read what Justice Alito said about gender identity?
Yes, it's like they didn't even know what that was then.
Well, here's exactly what Justice Alito said to agree with Penna Dexter.
You know what? We've got a break, so I'd rather just go to the break and have you read that when we come back. Ladies and gentlemen, Glenn Murdock is with me. We've got a lot more of Point of View. Stay with us.
The year 2020 has been filled with problems, or let's just call them challenges. Before I get into that, we want to thank you. We just passed the end of our fiscal year, and many stepped up in a very big and sacrificial way, showing just how much they believe that Point of View is needed as we head into the last half of this year. And that's where our new challenge comes in. At the last minute, a friend stepped up with a surprising $50,000 matching challenge, and listeners matched it. But after that, yet another friend, knowing how important this year is, put down another $50,000 challenge, and because we were so close to deadline, said we could extend it just a bit to July 15th. As our nation deals with so many issues, make sure that Point of View can be a strong voice for truth by helping us complete that second match. Double your investment by giving at pointofview.net/time or call 1-800-347-5151. The clock is ticking. Pointofview.net/time. That's TIME. Pointofview.net/time or 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Penna Dexter.
Welcome back to Point of View. My guest, Justice Glenn Murdock, and he's explaining the masterful dissent by Justice Samuel Alito in the Bostock versus Clayton County case. And, you know, sometimes reading dissents is just so instructive. This time it just made me want to cry. But Glenn, go ahead.
You know, you're right. A lot of lawyers, when they get the released opinions, they go straight to the dissent to learn what the majority said, and that's the most efficient way to do it sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we talked in the last segment about the landscape of law and culture when it came to sexual orientation and so forth in 1964, and how if you're going to construe a statute according to what the common understanding and a reasonable man would have thought it to mean, that you have to take a look at all of the laws that criminalize certain behavior and themselves by law discriminated in hiring in different ways. But then when it comes to transgenderism, as you were pointing out at the very end before the commercial break, that was unheard of. And here's how Justice Alito put it. While Americans in 1964 would have been shocked to learn that Congress had enacted a law prohibiting sexual orientation discrimination, they would have been bewildered to hear that this law also forbids discrimination on the basis of, quote, transgender status or, quote, gender identity, terms that would have left people at the time scratching their heads.
Mm-hmm.
Because, as Penna Dexter just pointed out, they'd never heard of those terms.
Yeah.
And so Alito has a point in the prior segment was that Alito's opinion is so forceful and so well done. And it does make you sad that he could not persuade the others. The others on the court, 6 others, of course, Justice Thomas joined Alito, Justice Kavanaugh wrote in dissent as well, but 6 others found a way around Alito's compelling reasoning. And this is where the opinion really rides on the same philosophical train as Obergefell. Under the banner of textualism, court abandons the big picture, the majority, and actually engages in a very simplistic, granular sophistry. Now, it does this with the following example. Now, the court actually gives a lot of examples, but this is the quintessential example that the court uses, the majority, to explain its decision. An employer has 2 employees. The court tells us to assume that there are no material differences between these 2 employees other than the fact that one is female and one is male. Now, both employees are attracted to men. But the court tells us that there is no material distinction between these employees other than one is male and one is female. So that if the male is fired, but the female is not, the law must conclude that he was fired because of his status, his gender. After all, and that's the predicate that we are required to accept from the example that the majority gives us. That there is no other difference between these 2 employees. Quote, in all material respects, they are identical, except for their status that one is a man and one is a woman. So the majority is saying there's no behavioral difference here. Sex is sex. It's all the same. Nothing to see here. Move along. No difference in behavior between these 2 employees that could be the reason why one is fired and the other is not. Or at least no difference in behavior that the law will countenance or acknowledge as a true difference. No difference in behavior that the court will allow into the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And if there is a difference if there is a truth about the difference in the behavior of these two employees that the society accepted, right or wrong, but that society accepted back in 1964, then the court wants to deny that truth. It is denying that truth. It's saying that such a truth cannot be acknowledged by the law any longer. It is denying to employers the ability to acknowledge or to act upon such a truth, to exercise their belief that there is a difference in the behavior at issue. So what the majority is doing, and I think you may have posted this on your website, an article by Carl Truman.
Yes, The Road to Bostock.
Right. And he makes this point. What they're doing is they're bending reality. They're bending truth to their own way of thinking. Does that make sense?
It makes sense to me, and that's why it's so upsetting, because to me it seems, first of all, how did we get to the point where the court would do that? But I think more than that, the damage now that comes from this, from actually doing this. I mean, the Congress fought this agenda for years. I mean, the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, it was introduced many, many times over and over again for sexual orientation. They added the transgender identity to that. The Congress would never make a change like that. They refused to do it. You could get one house to agree, but the other wouldn't. It never happened. Then they started with the Equality Act, which is pretty much the same thing. And the House passed that, but the Senate did not consider it. So Congress did absolutely, despite so much effort to change the situation, they didn't. The court just did it in one fell swoop.
No, you're right. You're right. The court assumed away any such truths as we've been talking about, or any sincerely held beliefs by employers as to such truths as to what is normal or natural or true or good or bad in this situation. They've assumed out of the 1964 law any of normative values that were part of the context of 1964. Now, again, you might say, well, American society is different. It's been 56 years. To your point, it's been 56 years where the Congress, from time to time, has started down the path of amending the law, but they couldn't agree to do so. But the fact that they felt like, or many of them felt like they needed to do so, is so telling, and it feeds to the point that maybe society is ready, maybe it's not, but to assume these things out of the law, to assume that this behavioral difference, to assume these concepts of normalcy and naturalness that were part of the context of the 1964 Act, that is not a job for the court. That is, as you're pointing out, that's a job for the people through their elected representatives or through organic changes in our Constitution. And so what the majority was doing, as Alito says at the beginning of his writing, there is only one word for what the court does today, legislation. The court was taking over the role of Congress. It's like I said at the outset, in Obergefell, they wrote their own constitution, and in Bostock, they wrote their own statute under that constitution.
So I guess that's kind of answering, in a sense, you're answering my question, where does it go from here? They'll continue to write more statutes.
Well, they hardly have to write any more. According to Justice Alito, there are already 100 federal statutes that prohibit sex discrimination.
Yeah, so that's already, we're going to see the changes, and we're going to see a lot of litigation with regard to some of those, aren't we?
Oh, I think that the courts will be inundated. Different eras in appellate courts are known for different types of issues repeatedly coming up. Back in the 90s and 2000s, arbitration was a big issue in a lot of states. And I think that you can anticipate that the next 10 years and beyond, there will be a flood of sexual orientation and gender, I call it gender self-identification, cases that are brought. I mean, the possibilities are endless, and you know, it just starts with bathrooms. I mean, you can start with bathrooms and locker rooms.
We got a long way to go. Listen, let me jump in again because we've got a break. I also want to ask Justice Murdock about the feminist movement and some of the gains that could actually be wiped out by this decision. We'll be back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want to mention and send you to pointofview.net to find one of the articles we discussed, and I still have some questions for Justice Murdock about The Road to Bostock by Carl Trueman. It's posted at pointofview.net, and we are also in the process of posting another one he sent me, the Bostock case and the rule of law by Robbie George, a Princeton professor. And Glenn, I just want to ask you a question about the road to Bostock, because Carl Trueman does something in here. It's to explain how we got there. And I just want to add this to the discussion because everybody kind of just wondering why. And you kind of refer to this, but he talks about something called the autonomous self-creator to whom reality must bend, or better still, for whom reality is merely what works best for the individual concerned. To me, this describes the gender identity movement that's going on right now. And this decision took this into consideration, didn't it?
It absolutely did. Actually, the premise of this decision in Obergefell and so many decisions is essentially putting man on the throne and denying the fact that truth comes external to man. Man does not get to decide in his own mind what is true. There is an objective reality to the world around us. There's an objective truth. And from time immemorial, it has been man's function to search for that truth and to discern it, but not to make it up in his own mind, each man for himself, each one of America's 350 million residents for themselves. And yet Justice Kennedy in Casey in the Sweet Mystery of Life passage says, no, that's what it is. Each man gets to decide for himself the meaning of life, the meaning of the universe, and basically truth. And it's from that philosophy, this as Truman puts it, the autonomous actor getting to decide for himself what his truth is and bending reality to his own preferences. That is where we are in the law. It was so much of this that even preceded and presaged Obergefell, unfortunately.
So it's such arrogance. But to the believer, to the church-going Christian, another thing that Truman says in this piece, which I thought was interesting, but he says the pressing pastoral need of the hour for the church, because I just sometimes the ignorance of the church, the inability to understand these things, or even to be that concerned about it. He says the pressing pastoral need of the hour for the church is not to explain the faith of the world or to the world, not necessarily to explain us to them, but rather to explain the world to the faithful, because I think people are scratching their heads and going, what is happening and why should I care?
Yeah, and that was true of churches for the last 30 years, and that left the playing field open to the enemy to spread untruth and because the church as a whole was not doing its job of explaining the world to the church and putting things in context and applying Scripture to the events of the day. And you said earlier that the events of the day are going to continue to change, and I think that's unfortunately true. We said Obergefell was the death knell for religious freedom. Well, maybe this is more of a death knell with an NAIL spelling for a lot of things that we have taken as just normal parts. I talk to my friends, even my wife sometimes, and they're just amazed and bewildered that I would think that we are at risk of losing this or losing that because they're not able to keep up with everybody's busy. And they just can't believe that the America that they grew up in is being pulled out from under them in such radical ways in our courts, especially the Supreme Court. They grew up thinking the Supreme Court was wise and 5 or 9 oracles on high, and they were going to make the decisions that were consistent with truth, justice, and the American way. And it would all work out in the end because America is America and always will be. Well, America will always be America only generation by generation, as Reagan said. Only if we, each of us in our own time, do what we need to do to stand up and preserve it. And there's a lot at risk, even from this latest decision. You mentioned women's sports.
Right. I mean, even the left, the feminist movement is, they've had some gains that have actually been something we can really celebrate. I think women's sports was one of them. And, I mean, really, you're going to erase women's sports with this.
Because under that granular, if you use that granular sophistry reasoning, that narrow funnel-looking reasoning of the majority opinion, then you would have to say, you are letting women participate in this women's category, but you're not letting a man. Therefore, you are discriminating because of sex. That is the kind of denial of differences in the genders and denial of truth that is engendered when you put man on the throne and let him come up with what his own truth is. But it's not just women's sports, as you know. It is, think about university housing. You're sending your precious young daughter, or even your precious some sons that go to college are precious.
Yes. I had a couple.
Right. Okay. We can agree on that. That may be a stretch for some people to think. But you're sending your precious young 17, 18-year-old son or daughter off to college, and the university says, well, under Bostock, I could assign a female to this room, but I can't assign you as a male to this room. No, Bostock says I can't discriminate against you on the basis of your sex anymore. So university housing is at issue. We talked about bathrooms and locker rooms. Oh my gosh. Are employers now going to be required to suppress speech in the workplace when one employee exercises free speech rights to disapprove of homosexuality? I mean, can that be permitted anymore? And maybe it shouldn't be permitted, but it is not for the court, arguably, to make that decision. It's for Congress. Boys' summer camps, hiring cabin counselors, hiring mentors for 7 and 8 and 9. I have 2 grandsons, 9 and 11. I have 2 granddaughters. One is almost old enough to go to a girls' summer camp. Are we going to say
no such thing?
You can't have or no such thing, or when you are hiring, you cannot discriminate against a man who applies for the position of cabin counselor. You cannot discriminate against a transgender who wants to be the cabin counselor for the group of second grade girls that go off to this summer camp. And then there's the church.
Yeah. Okay, well, let me just jump in here because we've got a minute left. And I know that Justice Gorsuch said the religious liberty questions were going to be decided later. So it didn't give us a whole lot of, I guess, satisfaction that religious liberty would be protected. And that's probably going to be a subject for another discussion with you, Glenn. I hope you'll come back and join me again.
Yeah, Penn, I hate to leave listeners without hope. I did that one other
This
time.
was negative, but it's a real sad day.
It is a sad day, but can I just say one more thing real quick? The psalmist and the contemporary songwriter say, I shout for joy at the work of your hand. Forever I'll love you. Forever I'll stand. Nothing compares to the promise I have in you. And we're called to stand. We know how the story ends. We know what the promise is. But that doesn't mean that we can just sit back and wait and see how the world unfolds. He calls on us to stand. As
Absolutely.
one great Christian once said, stand until the stars fall. It's our job to pray and to stand and to speak to our neighbors, to speak to our deacons in our church, to speak truth to our pastors.
And on that note, we'll see you tomorrow. Thanks, Glenn, for being with me.
The year 2020 has been filled with problems, or let's just call them challenges. Before I get into that, we want to thank you. We just passed the end of our fiscal year, and many stepped up in a very big and sacrificial way, showing just how much they believe that Point of View is needed as we head into the last half of this year. And that's where our new challenge comes in. At the last minute, a friend stepped up with a surprising $50,000 matching challenge, and listeners matched it. But after that, yet another friend, knowing how important this year is, put down another $50,000 challenge, and because we were so close to deadline, said we could extend it just a bit to July 15th. As our nation deals with so many issues, make sure that Point of View can be a strong voice for truth by helping us complete that second match. Double your investment by giving at pointofview.net/time or call 1-800-347-5151. The clock is ticking. Pointofview.net/time. That's TIME. Pointofview.net/time or 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.